In a modest African village, a quiet and beautiful woman, Amara, marries the man of her dreams. But her life quickly spirals into a nightmare, with death loom over her every step. Even the joy of motherhood becomes a battlefield. When her husband, Kelechi, is mysteriously struck down, suspicion turns the village against her. But the real horror lurks in her own home, a sinister force closer than she could ever imagine. As Amara faces these terrors, the truth will shatter her world. What would be her fate? This is a story of love, betrayal, and hope. Like, share, and subscribe to Savannah Storytime for more captivating stories that leaves you wanting more. In the heart of the African landscape lay the village of Umudike, a place where tradition was not merely observed, but lived. The land was rich, both in soil and in spirit, yielding bountiful harvests that sustained the bodies of its people and stories that nourished their souls. The villagers of Umudike, with their skin kissed by the sun and their hearts rooted in the past, carried the wisdom of their ancestors in every word spoken and every step taken. It was in this village, under the protective gaze of the Iroko, that Amara and Kelechi's love story began. Amara, with her warm, rich brown skin that gleamed like polished mahogany, was a woman of quiet strength. Orphaned at a young age, she had been left alone when her only brother, Obi, withdrew from her life after their parents' death. But Amara was resilient. A skilled tailor, she had made a life for herself, her small shop a haven for the women of Umudike, who sought her beautiful creations. Despite her challenges, Amara carried herself with dignity. Kelechi, on the other hand, was the son of the soil, a humble farmer whose hands were calloused from years of toiling the earth. His frame was sturdy, like the yam tendrils that clung to the stakes in his fields. His face, though often serious, softened whenever he looked at Amara. His eyes, dark and deep as the river that ran through the village, spoke of quiet strength and a heart that beat only for her. Their courtship was a gentle dance, marked by Kelechi's thoughtful gifts, fresh flowers, ripe guavas, and baskets of yams, and Amara's intricately woven fabrics, each piece a token of her affection. Their conversations were filled with soft laughter and shy glances, their love growing like the crops in Kelechi's fields, nurtured by time, patience, and the blessings of the earth. As their wedding day approached, Umudike buzzed with excitement. The women of the village, women whose beauty had not faded with age, busied themselves with preparations with different delicacies, the rich aroma filling the air. The men gathered palm wine and tapped fresh from the tall palm trees that bordered the village. On the day of the wedding, the sun shone as if it too had received the invitation. The village square where the ceremony would take place was transformed into a sea of color. The villagers came dressed in their finest, women in vibrant wrappers and headscarves adorned with coral beads, and men in flowing agbadas, their chests adorned with traditional necklaces. Amara, the bride, was a vision to behold. She wore a white wrapper that clung to her graceful form, the fabric shimmering in the sunlight. Around her neck, coral beads hung in abundance, a symbol of wealth and status. Her face was adorned with delicate patterns of traditional dye that enhanced her natural beauty. Her heart-shaped face, framed by the beads and the uli, glowed with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. As she walked towards Kelechi, her steps were light, as though she floated on the air, her eyes locked onto his. Kelechi stood at the center of the square, waiting for his bride. He was dressed in matching attire, a white wrapper with a flowing agbada over it, his head crowned with a cap that marked him as a man of the people. His face, usually composed, now held a smile that stretched wide, unable to contain the joy that filled him. He watched Amara approach, his heart pounding in his chest, each step bringing her closer to him, to their future. As they stood before the elders and the assembled villagers, the titled chief, Anze Okoro, began the ceremony, invoking the spirits of their ancestors to bless the union. Amara and Kelechi exchanged vows, their voices steady and clear, each word a promise. Each promise is a bond stronger than the iron that the blacksmiths of Umudike forged. With their vows sealed under the watchful eyes of their ancestors and the protective shade of the Iroko, Amara and Kelechi were now husband and wife. The village erupted in celebration, the sound of joy echoing through the hills and forests, carrying the news of their union far and wide. In Umudike, where ancient trees whispered secrets, the love between Amara and Kelechi once flourished like the first light of dawn. But as time passed, their love began to sour. The small joys that once united them turned into seeds of discord. Kelechi, burdened by the demands of the earth, lingered longer in the fields, returning to Amara's sharp words instead of the laughter that once filled their home. Amara too had changed. Once joyful, she now felt trapped by her duties, the weight of her responsibilities draining her spirit. Their home, once alive with music and laughter, grew silent, echoing with unspoken words and disappointment. One evening, their simmering tension boiled over, leading to a painful exchange. Suddenly, Amara collapsed, clutching her belly as blood stained her wrapper. It was the fifth miscarriage, a devastating loss that deepened the chasm between them. 4 years had passed since their marriage, but the child they longed for remained a distant dream. Neka, Kelechi's mother, was a woman carved from the same stone as the mountains that bordered Umudike, unyielding, strong, and rooted in tradition. She had waited patiently for the sound of little feet in her son's home, but her patience had reached its end. Neka arrived at Kelechi's home unannounced, her presence a sudden chill, forewarning the storm to come. Standing in the doorway, her shadow stretched ominously against the fading light. "We will find a new wife for our son," Neka declared, her voice as cold as the Harmattan wind, stripping Amara of any hope. The words landed like a curse, heavy and final, leaving no room for protest. Amara, once the center of Kelechi's world, felt her heart falter. The walls that once offered warmth now closed in, suffocating her in silence. Alone and adrift, she moved through the days like a ghost, her spirit crushed by loneliness. The village, once a place of comfort, now turned its gaze on her with judgment and pity. The burden of childlessness, the scorn of her husband's family, and the abandonment by her own blood weighed her down. Each day, she felt herself shrinking, clinging to the fragile hope that she might survive the tempest that had overtaken her life. As the 5th year of their marriage approached, the winds of fate shifted. Amara, whose womb had been a source of both hope and heartache, found herself with child once more. This news, like the first rains after a long dry season, brought with it a glimmer of hope. Kelechi, who had once been distant and cold, now became a man transformed. He took on the household chores with a zeal that left the villagers of Umudike murmuring in surprise. Kelechi, who had once come home late and tired from the farm, now rose early, sweeping the compound and fetching water from the stream before the cock crowed. He refused to let Amara lift a finger, insisting that she rest and care for the life growing within her. But for Amara, this sudden change was like the sun emerging after a long eclipse, dazzling yet blinding. The scars of their past were still fresh, and the memory of their lost child lingered like a shadow over her heart. The tension between them simmered, like a pot of yam porridge left too long on the fire. Amara, who had once been content to hold her tongue, found her patience wearing thin. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Kelechi insisted she rest instead of preparing the evening meal. A simple request, spoken with kindness, but it struck a deep chord. Where was this care when I needed it before? The words flew out, sharp as a hunter's arrow. The air between them crackled with unspoken pain. Stung, Kelechi responded harshly, and their voices rose, echoing through the compound, until in a moment of anger, Kelechi struck her. The slap was a thunderclap that silenced them both. Eyes wide with shock, Amara felt the sting of betrayal. She began to pack, her heart heavy with all that had been lost. Neighbors gathered, drawn by the commotion, their faces etched with concern. Even Kelechi's parents, Okechukwu and Neka, got the news and hurried to the scene, their own hearts heavy with the knowledge that their son's marriage was unraveling before their eyes. They pleaded with Amara, their voices thick with desperation, but her mind was made up. It was Neka, with her soft, matronly voice, who finally reached through the fog of Amara's anger and despair. Noah, my child, she said, placing a gentle hand on Amara's arm. Do not leave on an empty stomach. Let me prepare something for you, for the sake of your unborn child. Neka moved with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had seen many seasons, her hands deftly preparing a simple meal. She brewed a special herbal tea, its scent filling the air with a comforting warmth. Amara sat, her anger slowly ebbing away, replaced by a deep weariness. She ate in silence, the warmth spreading through her body like a balm. As the night fell, the tension that had filled the air began to dissipate. Amara, her mind clearer now, decided to stay, if only for the night. The darkness outside seemed less threatening than the uncertainty of leaving, and for now, that was enough. But as the stars blinked into the night sky, Amara knew that the peace in her heart was as fragile as the flickering flame of an oil lamp. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, and the memories of that evening would linger, like the embers of a fire long after the flames had died down. That night, as the moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the village of Umudike, an ominous quiet settled over Kelechi and Amara's compound. Even the crickets fell quiet, as if sensing the approaching darkness. Inside, Amara lay awake, her thoughts troubled by the day's quarrels, unaware of the looming tragedy. Kelechi's low groan broke the night's stillness, growing into a desperate cry. Amara sprang up to find him writhing in pain, his face contorted, breaths labored. Panic surged as she watched the man she knew as strong and unyielding crumble before her eyes. Kelechi, what is it? Amara's voice trembled as she knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his body, not knowing where to touch, how to ease his pain. But Kelechi could only shake his head, his eyes wide with terror. His pain was beyond words, beyond anything he had ever known. Amara ran to fetch the village healer, but when they returned, Kelechi's condition had worsened. The healer did what she could, her hands moving swiftly, mixing herbs, but it was in vain. Amara could only watch as the life drained from her husband's eyes. His final breath was a faint whisper, a barely audible sigh that slipped from his lips and drifted into the night. And then he was gone, his life slipping away like sand through her fingers, leaving behind only a hollow shell of the man she had loved. The dawn broke, but the light brought no relief. The news of Kelechi's sudden death spread through Umudike like wildfire, carried on the lips of every villager. The drums of mourning began to beat, their deep, sorrowful rhythm echoing through the village, drawing people from their homes. Soon, the compound was filled with family members and neighbors, their faces etched with grief and confusion. But as the women wailed and the men muttered among themselves, a dark cloud of suspicion began to gather. Whispers floated through the air like the wind, carrying with them the seeds of doubt and fear. How could a man so strong, so full of life, be struck down in the prime of his years? What evil force could have stolen him away in the dead of night? And most importantly, who was to blame? Amara sat in the midst of it all, her heart heavy with grief, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Her eyes, once bright with the joy of love, were now dull and lifeless, staring blankly at the ground. The love that once filled her home was replaced by an unbearable void, and with it, a dark, unseen force began to take root in her life. In Umudike, a storm brewed, not of rain, but of whispers that cut deeper than any blade. The once lively air now hummed with the weight of unsaid words as neighbors became shadows carrying tales twisted by fear. Amara, once proud, now shrank under the burden of grief and suspicion. Kalechi's sudden death shattered her heart, but the village's hushed accusations were a torment she hadn't imagined. Under the old baobab, elders, those who claimed wisdom but were quick to believe the worst, they whispered among themselves, their voices like the rustling of dry leaves. She must have done something, one said, his voice cracking with age. How else could a man as strong as Kelechi fall so suddenly? The women, too, gathered at the stream, where they fetched water and washed their clothes. But their tongues were sharper than their hands, and they carved Amara's name into the fabric of the village's consciousness with each word. Did you hear? One would start, and the others would lean in, eager for the next piece of the tale. They say she's a witch, another would add, eyes wide with the thrill of gossip. No, she poisoned his food. But the worst of all came from Kelechi's own mother, Neka. She had been consumed by grief, her sorrow turning into a fire that needed someone to burn. And so she turned that fire on Amara. In the market square, where the people gathered to trade and talk, Ineka found Amara buying fruits. Look at her, she cried, pointing a trembling finger at Amara, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her swollen belly a stark reminder of the life that still grew within her. This woman has brought death into my home. She has taken my son from me, and now she carries a demon in her womb. She even dares to eat. The villagers gasped, some drawing back as if Amara's presence could taint them. Amara could do nothing but stand there, frozen, as Neka's words pierced her heart. She wanted to scream, to protest, to beg for understanding, but the words stuck in her throat, choked by the weight of her despair. In the days that followed, Amara withdrew into herself, her home becoming a prison where the walls whispered accusations she could not escape. Alone with her thoughts, she began to believe the cruel accusations, wondering if the gods were indeed punishing her. It was on one such night, when the moon hung low and the world was cloaked in darkness, that Amara made her decision. The large tree at the back of the house, with its gnarled branches, seemed to call to her. She would end it there, beneath the tree that had once given her shade and comfort. She would take the rope, loop it around her neck, and let the darkness take her. But as she stood there, staring at the coarse fibers of the rope in her hands, a woman, dressed in white, her eyes like pools of still water reflecting the moonlight. Amara blinked, thinking it was a trick of her mind, but the woman remained, her presence as real as the earth beneath Amara's feet. The woman's voice, when she spoke, was like the wind through the reeds, gentle yet carrying the strength of 1,000 whispers. Child, I came to pick up herbs here. Sorry if I disturbed you, she said. Looking at Amara closely, she noticed her situation, a pregnant woman willing to take her own life. This is not your path, she quickly added. The gods have not abandoned you, though it may seem so. You are not alone. Amara fell to her knees, the rope slipping from her fingers as tears streamed down her face. The woman knelt beside her, taking Amara's hands in hers. Her touch was cool, calming the fire of despair that had burned within Amara for so long. My name is Emma Nwadiogo, the woman said, her gaze steady and kind. I have been sent to guide you, to help you see what has been hidden from you. Your journey is not over. And so, with her heart still heavy but no longer lost, Amara rose, her hope rekindled by the light of the woman who had come to save her. Amanwadiogo became her anchor, her lifeline in a world that had turned against her. The night was still, the tree now just a tree, and Amma walked Amara back into her home with the quiet assurance that she had been given a second chance. The following nights, the peaceful paths of the village were twisted into a labyrinth of fear. Neka, her mother-in-law, stood with a sinister smile, holding a cutlass, the blade gleaming like the fangs of a predator. Under the light of the moon, she pursued Amara. Her face was contorted in a rage that could split the heavens. The earth trembled beneath Amara's feet as she ran, her heart pounding like the village drum that called warriors to battle. Amara's breath came in ragged gasps as she fled, her pregnant belly a heavy weight, slowing her steps as Neka closed in. Just as Neka's blade was about to strike, Amara awoke. It was a dream, her body drenched in cold sweat, her heart beat a frantic rhythm against the silence of the night. The dream continued every night. As she visited Amanwadiogo, telling her the details of the bad dreams, the priestess handed Amara a white cloth. Sleep with this, she instructed, her voice heavy with the weight of things unsaid. It will protect you. However, the dreams did not stop. They returned each night, more vivid, more terrifying, until Amara could no longer distinguish between the dream world and reality. Then, one night, the nightmare took a darker turn. In this vision, Neka emerged from the shadows with a hunter's gun, her eyes locked onto Amara's swollen belly, a twisted smile playing on her lips. The gunshot rang out, a thunderous roar that echoed through the night and into Amara's very soul. She awoke with a scream, the echo of the shot still ringing in her ears. Trembling, she ran out that night to sort out Emma Nwadiogo. Mama, the dreams, Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. Mama Nwadiogo's eyes, dark and knowing, fixed on Amara's with a gaze. Amara, she began, her voice low and resonant. These dreams reveal the truths that remain hidden in the light of day, but you must not fear them. The white cloth will be your mirror, reflecting the darkness that seeks to harm you. Continue to use it. Face your fears, for it is only by confronting the darkness that you will find the light. Amara nodded, though her heart still quaked with fear. In the quiet stillness of the early morning, when the sun was yet to fully kiss the earth awake, Amara made her way to the village stream. The path was familiar, worn smooth by the feet of many before her, and yet today it seemed different. The air was thick with an unease she could not shake, as if the ancestors themselves were whispering warnings in the rustling leaves. As she bent down to fill her clay pot, the sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Okechukwu, Kelechi's father, standing before her. His face, usually strong and stoic like the old baobab tree, was now etched with lines of sorrow. His eyes clouded with a heaviness that Amara recognized all too well. Amara, he called her name, his voice low, almost a whisper carried on the wind. Neka requests your presence. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken dread. Amara felt her heart quicken, a wild drumbeat in her chest. She knew that this summons was not one to be taken lightly. Yet, she found strength in the words of the priestess. With a nod, Amara set down her pot and followed Okechukwu back to Kelechi's family compound. The journey felt longer than it was, each step echoing with the weight of what was to come. As they approached the compound, the sound of low, frantic muttering reached her ears, growing louder with each step. There, in the center of the compound, Neka stood, a woman unrecognizable from the proud matriarch she once was. She was draped in a red cloth. Her hair, once neatly plaited, now hung wild around her face, and her eyes. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, darting around as if she were being chased by invisible spirits. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She had seen madness before, but never like this. Neka's lips moved rapidly, her words spilling out in a jumbled mess. Gunshots. The blood. The noise won't stop. her hands clutched at the air, as if trying to grasp something only she could see. Okechukwu's voice was heavy with sorrow as he answered the question that had already formed in Amara's mind. "It began yesterday's night," he said, his words like stones being laid on a grave. And then Neka's wild eyes locked onto Amara, and in that moment, clarity cut through the fog of madness. She rushed forward, her hands reaching out, not in anger, but in desperation. "Amara, Amara," she called, her voice breaking. The confession spilled from her lips like a poison that had festered for too long. I cursed your womb," Nika began, her voice trembling with the weight of her sins. "I did it. I'm a witch. The miscarriages, they were my doing. Every child you lost, I ate them all." Amara's world tilted, the ground beneath her feet seeming to sway as the truth unraveled before her. But Nika was not done. "This your pregnancy. I've tried to kill the unborn child, but have failed several times. The herbs you took when I visited you last was also for that purpose. But when I failed, the coven turned on Kelechi. They took his life as payment for my failure." The madness that clung to Neka was now clear, a punishment for her actions. Her confession was both a plea for forgiveness and an acknowledgement of her damnation. Neka's final words were a lament, a dirge for the life she had destroyed with her own hands. "This my punishment. I can hear there the cries of the children I denied you, the face of my own son, taken by my own greed for power." Amara felt a strange sense of detachment. The pain, the anger, the betrayal. It was all too much, too overwhelming to process in that moment. But in the midst of it all, there was a cold, hard truth. Kelechi was gone, taken not by her own mistakes, but by the very woman who had given him life. The revelation of Neka's dark deeds had left the villagers in shock, their tongues heavy with disbelief. They spoke of the wickedness that could destroy not just the flesh, but the very soul of a family. Though Amara's name was cleared, the stain of Kelechi's death clung to her spirit like the morning mist that refused to lift. Amara sat alone in her small compound, the silence around her as thick as the shadows that now filled her once vibrant home. The emptiness of the house echoed the emptiness in her heart, a hollow space where dreams once lived. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the village, Amara heard a voice, familiar yet distant, calling her name. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years, a voice that carried with it the memories of a different time, a time when her world was whole. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, and there, standing at the entrance to her compound, was her brother, Obi. Obi, who had once been her protector, her confidant, now stood before her with eyes filled with remorse. His once strong frame seemed smaller, burdened by the weight of his own guilt and sorrow. Tears welled in his eyes as he took a step toward her, his voice breaking with emotion. "Sister," he began, his voice trembling like the leaves of the palm trees in a storm, "I have wronged you. In my grief, I abandoned you when you needed me the most. I let my pain blind me, and for that I am sorry." Amara's eyes filled with tears as she listened to his words, each one striking a chord deep within her. Obi's grief mirrored her own, and in that moment, she saw not just her brother, but a man who had been lost, just as she had been. He had been searching for her, he explained, through the winding paths of Umudike, only to be met with the devastating news of Kelechi's death. "I came to take you away from here, Amara," Obi continued, his voice stronger now, filled with a resolve that had been absent for so long. "We can leave this place, leave behind the pain and the sorrow. We can start anew, far from the shadows of the past." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Amara felt a flicker of something she thought had been lost forever: hope. She looked into Obi's eyes and saw the sincerity in his words, the promise of a future that, while uncertain, held the possibility of healing. With a heavy heart, but a spirit that refused to be broken, Amara stood. She looked around her compound one last time, the memories of Kelechi lingering in the air, like the scent of the earth after a storm. She knew that the pain of the past would never fully leave her, but she also knew that she could not remain trapped in a place that held so much sorrow. As the first stars began to dot the evening sky, Amara, after receiving blessings from Enma, left the red soil of Umudike with her brother, her heart heavy yet resilient, stepping into a future that, though filled with uncertainty, held the promise of healing, of new beginnings, and of a life yet to be lived. The village of Umudike, with its secrets and its sorrows, faded into the distance, but the spirit of Amara, unbroken and unyielding, carried on, a testament to the enduring strength of a woman who had faced the darkest of storms and emerged, if not unscathed, then at least still standing.